Are you looking for a new math curriculum? Well, CTC Math specializes in providing online video tutorials that take a multi-sensory approach to learning. Favorably reviewed in Kathy Duffy's 102 Top Picks and the Old Schoolhouse Crew Review. The lessons are short and concise to help your children break down concepts and appreciate math in a whole new way. The lessons are taught the traditional way, not to the test. Each one of the video tutorials is taught by an internationally acclaimed teacher, Pat Murray, who is renowned for teaching math concepts in a simple, easy-to-understand way and in only a few minutes at a time. Using a multi-sensory approach, having the combination of effective graphics and animation synchronized with the voice of a friendly teacher together with practical assessment, even students who struggled with math are getting fantastic results. And the ones that were doing okay before now are doing brilliantly. Visit CTC Math today and start your free trial. That's ctcmath.com.
This is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Welcome to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Your host, Felice Gerwitz, is an author, a publisher, and your radio show host. She will encourage, educate, and inspire you with answers to your most pressing questions from homeschool, marriage, parenting, and much more. Felice loves to equip moms to live a Christian life because every moment counts. Be sure to visit her website at mediaangels.com. And here's your host, Felice Gerwitz.
A boring lecture or math lesson that's not interesting is not going to inspire kids to learn and work hard. However, in this podcast, you will learn key elements to encourage your children to hone into their listening skills, all while learning. Hey friends and welcome. My name is Felice Gerwitz. This is an episode of Vintage Homeschool Moms. You can find today's podcast episode notes on your favorite app if you're listening, but also on the website at the ultimatehomeschoolpodcastnetwork.com. Look for Vintage Homeschool Moms. The topic today is Inspiring Kids to Learn, episode 534. And this is the second in my Inspire series. If you want to catch Inspire Kids to Listen, that was a previous episode that you can find on Vintage Homeschool Moms. All right, so why would anyone listen to a boring lecture or something that doesn't interest them? Because it's called school or it's called work. I remember having to network for my husband at one point in time, and I felt like I was going to die if I had to listen to another boring lecture or something that talked about a topic that I had no interest in. And I finally realized, gosh, I feel like my kids used to feel when I would bring up a topic that they didn't want to learn. And then I thought, gosh, what did I tell my kids? And I would tell my children, look, this is called school, and there's a reason that this information may appear boring to you, but it's something that's required and you have to learn. So try to learn one thing today, just one thing. And so what I did was try to turn a boring subject to them positive. What was a subject you hated in school? You know, the big joke is when you ask kids who go to school, what's your favorite subject? They'll say lunch or recess, if they still have that today. But for me, it was, I could not stand history. I didn't understand history. It seemed boring, all these dates and facts, and it was all disjointed in my mind. And there were events that happened a long time ago, I thought, and had nothing to do with me. If the teacher had said, look, if you don't understand your history and your past, you're going to make the same mistakes in the future. We see that happening in our nation today. But at the time, I had no concept of how important the subject was. And I have to tell you, when I learned history? When I taught my homeschool kids. I learned more as a parent than I did in all my years in high school and college. I also want to give a shout out to our sponsor. I almost forgot. ctcmath.com. This curriculum is available online for grades K through 12, and your children will receive lessons. And the fun thing is they have to pass it to move on, and you as a parent receive the results. So try it out. They give us a discount for our network. So you want to try out that link and find out more information about it. All right. So it leaves us with the million-dollar question. How do you inspire kids to learn? How do you overcome the obstacles? Well, true learning occurs when the child has a question to answer and they're interested in that question. The second part of that question is, where does a child go to find the answer? And please don't say they Google it. It used to be that was a reputable source for information. Now I feel like so much of it's filtered out. The saying, knowledge is power, is attributed to an unknown author, but that statement is so true. Without knowledge and true knowledge, we're left with the ideas and beliefs and thoughts of other people who don't necessarily have our best interests in mind. So you kind of need to explain to your kids, look, resources are important and primary sources are the best whenever possible. So a primary source is actually written by the person whose idea that came from. And my brother-in-law and I did a series of podcasts called Current Issues in the Constitution years ago. And he used to say, find 3 primary sources. So it wasn't just 1 or 2, but 3. And so when my kids struggled with a difficult subject, I would remind them, look, if it's easy, that means you know it already. And if it's hard, you don't know it yet. And I would give them an example. Just remember when you started learning to write and you couldn't even write the letters, and now you have no problem writing. So I would give them tangible things and tools to say, okay, it's hard now, but eventually this is going to be easy. Learning never stops this side of heaven. It's a comforting thought, right? We're constantly learning, as we should. Learning occurs when your child is curious and inquisitive, yes, but they also need to look at the world around them as a puzzle that needs to be solved, or at least find some of the right pieces. Learning takes place when there's an exchange of ideas and thoughts. I'm really big on teaching your kids to think, teaching them to think for themselves, and talking to you. And one thing I want to say, parents, and this is a total aside, and it's not in my notes, and that is the only way that your kids can learn from you is by being with you. And one of the things that they're being told online is to distance themselves from their parents. And the oxymoron of it all is that these videos say, well, try to distance yourself from your parents and just don't be around them, but listen to me and make sure you spend all your time with me and what I have to say to you. And it's detrimental to our kids. They're not going to know what we think or our thought processes unless we share it with them and have robust discussions. When my kids were younger, I taught them using unit studies, and I felt, gosh, this is the best way to incorporate the awe of learning, and it also had a dose of mystery. And why is that? Because we didn't have all the answers. We had to search for them, but we were going to learn, and it might be a little bit difficult, and it might be a little bit messy, but we were going to figure out the solution. I would talk to them about mysteries. A mystery eventually comes to a conclusion, right? It's a previously unsolved problem or puzzle that has an answer, but how you get to that answer is almost as important as what the mystery is in and of itself. If you can approach education with this in mind and encourage your kids, it puts a touch of excitement into your schooling. You can set the stage at the beginning of the year. Ask the kids if they know every answer in their math or history or science or whatever that book is that they're going to study. The answer is going to be no for now, but yes, or a lot more by the end of the year. And then at the end of the year, ask them, what did you learn? We used to have the kids stand up and do reports about what they learned, and they knew this was going to be an expectation at the beginning of the year. And sometimes they would say, oh, I'm going to put this aside because I want to talk about this in my report. So they knew that this was something that was going to happen each year. You can set the stage with whatever that is that you want in your homeschool. Is all learning fun? No, but it's necessary. Just like I hated history, and I told my kids that I disliked history. I didn't like wars. So even as a homeschool parent, we didn't cover all of World War I and II and go into all the nuances of the war. I gave them the basic information about it, again, so that they understood the reason behind it. And I remember my daughter going to college, who is the history major, and she was kind of complaining to her professor that her mother hated wars and didn't teach wars. And later, when she turned in her paper, her teacher said to her, well, obviously your mother did something right. This paper is excellent. So at least this teacher gave me a little bit of credit here. But it was a standing joke. Mom doesn't like wars. But my daughter, who was interested in history, she learned about it and she studied it on her own. And that's where true learning takes place. Finding out an answer is like solving a riddle or a problem. That is why they call math problems. One of our friends is a doctor, and I asked him about, an issue, and he said to me, do you want the doctor answer or do you want the real answer? And I looked at him and I said, well, of course, the real answer. He goes, the real answer is, I don't know. And I go, well, what's the doctor answer? And then he gave me this long, convoluted, using a lot of big words, and he could see the puzzlement in my face. And I go, what does that mean? And he goes, exactly. And he was teasing me, and he did know the answer. But he goes to me, Felice, why do you think they call it a practice? Doctors have a practice. And again, a joke there. And he was a great doctor. But you get the gist of it, and I think that we sometimes have to figure things out ourselves. There is an answer that you figure out, and the same goes for science and history, and some of them are experiments, and we may not have a conclusion that matches our hypothesis, but that's what learning is all about. There are some things that are facts, like there's 3 forms of water: solid, liquid, and gas. We learn about the explorers who crossed the ocean. Of course, there's a lot of, pushback on what they did and were they good people and so on and so forth. Irregardless, specific explorers came and crossed the ocean into what we now know as America on these dates. And it's like, I think sometimes we get so bogged down with all of the other things that revolve around it. The kids need to know about our country. They need to know why you stand for what you stand for. As I'm recording this is a political time, and we discuss a lot of things as a family. My children understand the whys. My homeschool included fun, yes, but you may think it's an unnecessary element, and that fun goes a long way toward getting kids to learn, or maybe you think, no, my kids are just going to learn because I said they need to get this done. And I had a friend who, that was her philosophy, is that no, school's not fun. It's a necessary thing. And her kids did great. And she would just shake her head at me when I would tell her some of the things we did. She did our evaluations at the end of each school year. And she, unlike me, kept her teaching degree current. And she would sit with me and look through our portfolio, and she would say, I can see why your kids enjoy homeschooling. They didn't like every subject. I'm not going to, push the limits here, but they did get their facts down when necessary, and they were creative when it was possible. I tried to finish lessons with flashcards or facts, split the kids into groups and have them play games to see who remembered what we just talked about. I remember one time the kids were drawing a diagram of a cell, and one of my sons, I could just tell, was just totally spacing out. And here he was drawing the cell and the nucleus, and he was labeling everything I put on the marker board. And then I took a big towel and I just put it over the board and I said, hey, close your books and I'm going to ask you some questions. And then I went and I erased all of the diagram part of it. And I said, okay, what is this called? My son couldn't recall one thing. He had just copied and drawn this diagram, but I could tell he wasn't paying any attention. And I said, no worries. Go back and just, take some time and go back and learn it. And so he did. And so I think sometimes, we all zone out. And there are some times when we're not paying attention. And that's why the previous podcast was the importance of listening and also the importance of being a parent that encourages. This was one of my struggling learners, and I wanted to be sure that he also understood the topic without being ultra critical. I tried to teach history and science together in the younger years until they got older, and then it was easier to split them up. And I had to make learning happen sometimes when it was really difficult. In fact, if they remembered something, I was so excited. But if not, I always would say, well, let's try again the next day. When they were younger, I did a lot of things with charts, and I think that was part of being, having some background in elementary ed. But I remember having huge charts of birds and land animals and all different kinds of things, and it was far enough back where the kids couldn't read the name of the animal. And I was very impressed with how much they remembered. And then at one point, I even made a chart for myself. And as they were going through the different types of birds, one of their siblings would point to it and the other one would sit far enough back so I knew they weren't reading the names of the birds. And they were going through all of these, different names of the birds. I remember one time one of my kids going, look, Mom, there's an indigo bunting. I'm like, how do you know that? Well, it's on our chart. So blue jay, robin, mockingbird, things like that I didn't have a problem with. And then we had a lot of water birds, obviously being in Florida. But I started little things like that so that the kids would just get an idea that learning could be fun. They would compete against themselves, and then they would see how many they could remember. And it was just, again, an exercise in, memorization. And it was, something we did when they were younger. All right, so you have a teen. You see my little sigh there? For teens that struggle to learn, you really need to show them the relevance in their learning. Now, do you have to? Of course not. You're the parent. You can do what you want. But when I gave my kids a little hook to put on to their learning, it went so much better. For example, I did things like, well, we have to learn about math to study finances and the value of $1. And you want to keep from getting swindled someday, right? And you need to learn to read because you need to find more information. I mean, what if you have to sign a contract someday and you can't read it all? Or you have to learn about history to keep from making the same mistakes, or at least know if our country's headed in the wrong direction. So, as you can see, interspersed in there are some of my little comments. But whatever that is, and that is important to you as a parent, stick that in so that your children understand. And if they say, well, Mom, I don't agree for this reason, just say, okay, for what reason? Just because? Or because some random person said that on social media? And ask them why. I could go off on a tangent and explain how my kids never got cell phones or access to social media until they were well into their late teens, but that is up to you and your spouse, your family to decide, not for me to tell you. I feel that it gave my kids a cushion, and they were never allowed to just be on their phones at home. They used their phones as a mechanism of being able to get in touch with me when they were gone, especially when they played sports. My kids were homeschooled all the way through. So last two did dual enrollment. So they did some college courses, but not full time. And so each family is different, right? And you need to talk to your teens. They are, going to be young adults at some point. Ask your kids, what do you want to learn? And if you could study anything, what would that be? And I know there's kids who go, well, I don't want to study anything and I don't care about learning. And you go, really? That's a really strong opinion. Can you tell me why? So you don't think we need learning? So I guess you don't need to learn to take a test for your driver's license? Or, gosh, you don't need to learn if somebody's cheating you if you give them a $10 bill and they return a penny change when all you bought was a $2 item? Is that what you're telling me? And just sit and ask and talk to them. Don't be annoyed. Just listen. We want to give our kids a little bit of credit, and they've probably gotten this information from somewhere. And sometimes it can be hurtful. I had a parent tell me one time that their kid said, well, you can't teach me this. And the parent said, you know what? I can't teach you chemistry because I never took it in school. But I can find the resources so that you can get a good education. And that's what's important. Ask your teens what they want to learn and go for it. Give them one subject that they can learn about. One of my children studied photography, another oceanography. Another one was a builder, and he built catapults and he fixed machinery. I gave my kids some parameters, but I also gave them the tools they needed to help them learn something of interest, and that encouraged them to learn. Sure, some of them were college bound and had some requirements on their list, but they also had some leeway in what they read for English class or literature class and what we studied for history. Out of my 5 children, 3 went to college and 2 went into blue-collar jobs. I now wish I had listened to my non-college track kids about what they wanted to do and learn instead of preparing them for the what if they decide to go to college track. But that's okay. The learning wasn't lost, and one of my college-bound children decided too late to go into engineering. He couldn't handle the difficult math. Sure, he could have done it, but he didn't really want to. And he still went into an intense engineering-focused major, and he graduated with honors. But I think exploring careers in middle and high school, especially if you have either a blue-collar worker child or a college-minded child, that will help you prepare with the prerequisites is important. You can inspire kids to learn with real-life applications, especially for your teens, and they may actually observe you learning each day as well. We learn whether we listen or read the news or try to look up a new tax rule or look up the best insurance rate on our homes and cars. And that's another application that you can explain to your kids. It requires comparison, evaluation, and ultimately finding the best deal for your budget. And you can give them an assignment like that as well. Giving your kids real-life examples and including them in your research whenever you can is another way for them to learn. If they have a car or they're saving up for one, they can begin to research different insurance policies or what cars are better to have. Obviously a sports car is going to have a higher rate for an insurance policy than a practical car, and what the coverage means. And it can be mind-blowing. Practical skills are important for anyone. The one thing you can't take away from someone is their knowledge, and that's another thing I always told my children. In today's world, knowledge is so important to be able to make good decisions, face challenges, and figure out the best income, and keep ourselves moving forward and always thinking. I'm going to put a few links in the show notes. I have a few different types of resources that you might be interested in, so you'll want to check that out. Again, you can go to the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network, look for Vintage Homeschool Moms, Inspiring Kids to Learn, episode 534. And again, I'm early on in the series. If you can think of an idea that I should podcast about in the theme of inspiring, I have Inspiring Kids to Listen was the previous one. This was Inspire Kids to Learn. The next one is Inspiring Kids to Succeed. The next one is Inspiring Kids to Empathize. And the last one I have is Inspiring Kids with Their Self-Esteem. So if you can think of another topic, shoot me an email at felice@mediaangels.com. Until next time, God bless, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Visit Felice at mediaangels.com and thevintagehomeschoolmoms.com. Vintage Homeschool Moms is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.